Okay, well, welcome everybody. We are going to get this Lunch and Learn started. We are so appreciative that you have taken time to spend this hour with us discussing something really important. My name is Sarah LaChance. I'm with Stop the Movement, and I'm joined by Kristen Taylor, also with Stop the Movement. And today we have a guest that we are honored to have this conversation with, our friend Frank Rich. He is the founder of Rebuilt Recovery, and he's going to give you a little bit of his background. We're going to dive into a conversation about pornography. It is a topic that is extremely taboo, and it shouldn't be. It's something that we don't talk about in churches, we don't talk about in schools, we certainly don't talk about with family or friends. So if somebody is consuming it and struggling with this, who are they supposed to turn to? So that's why we want to have this informal, unbuttoned conversation today to really blow the lid off of the stigma and to figure out how we can find practical tips to overcome this, to equip people to have the conversations, and then what should we do moving forward, and also prevention. So with that, let's get into it. Frank, I'd love you to introduce yourself a little bit. First and foremost, we want to know your personal story. That is the most important. People need to know, where are you coming from? Why does this matter to you? How has it affected you? And we'll go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Kristen. I'm glad you kind of set up the intro in the way that you did, right? I've had an opportunity now with my podcast. So I started a podcast in 2019, which has enabled me to go on some rather large platforms and kind of share my story across the globe. And it's been interesting because it's been this evolution of people introducing me. I used to be the one at the beginning that always say, guys, we're going to have this taboo conversation, the one that nobody wants to have, right? And then I quickly realized, like, I was feeding into the problem by coming at it from that perspective and lens. I want to remove that taboo part from this conversation. I want to make this the everyday conversation. I remember I had the founder of Protect Young Eyes on the show, Chris McKenna, incredible organization out there fighting evil, just like you guys are with Stop the Movement. And I remember Chris telling me that in his home and in everybody's home, pornography should be the most common word. And I've shared this at some of the events I've had an opportunity to speak with you guys. So I think for the people here today, I think for the people watching and hearing this, we need to begin to step into this conversation without guilt, without shame, without judgment. And that's always going to be my goal here today. But my story, like most of the men that we work with, I was introduced to pornography at a very young age. I say it was about six years old. I remember if it was 5, 6, 7, it was somewhere at a very young age. I always say I am very fortunate and grateful that I grew up in the 80s and 90s and I didn't get introduced to pornography on the internet, because there's no telling what would have happened in my life. But at that young age, it did plant a seed of curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
And I can remember always looking for opportunities to either find it, whether it was late night, Skinamax movies, or rushing to grab the newspaper first thing when we got it delivered on Sunday morning to try to get the lingerie catalogs out of it. Like, very secrecy type of behavior for a young boy. It wasn't until I was in my early 20s that I got access to like smartphone technology. And that's when the addiction really began to kind of take form. I was, working in the retail wireless industry. So I was traveling across malls all across the state of Florida. And I can remember having what at the time I just thought was like a normal thing. People would take smoke breaks. I would take pornography breaks. I would literally walk from my location into big department stores, Nordstrom's, Macy's, Dillard's, whatever kind of the mall had, and kind of sit there in these big, large private restrooms and look at pornography. If you would have asked me in my 20s, did I have an addiction? Probably would have said no. I don't think that there was the language understanding it. I don't think we understood it from a scientific perspective as well. But I knew that it was not normal to a certain degree. And as I fast forwarded and kind of matured through my adult life, it showed up pretty regularly. It showed up in secrecy within relationships. It showed up in erectile dysfunction and kind of sexual issues as well. It wasn't until I had a few kind of radical encounters experiences. One was a submission of my life to Christ in 2018 that really began to open me up and open my eyes up to I need to start living my life differently. February
Mm,
14th of 2019 is the date I was pointing to as like the day that I really got control of this. And it
mm,
started with finding a place to talk about it. And I'm sure when we get into some of the tactics and strategies, we'll talk about some of the things that I did. But opening up with men that I entrusted in my life and having them embrace me in a way that was guilt-free and shame-free
mm,
showed me that, A, for one, I had really been limiting my personal, professional, and spiritual growth for 20
mm.
years. But then
Wow.
getting on the other side of it changed the way that I saw the world. I had no clue about organizations like yours. I didn't understand the tie with human trafficking. I just felt like a different person, and I wanted to share that with other people. And that was kind of the
Mm,
genesis of my first podcast was like, hey, my life has changed. I thought I was successful in business and marketing and bodybuilding, but having this new perspective, having this changed heart, having this
mm,
rewired and rebooted mind showed a greater opportunity to help others. And that's why I
mm.
started the podcast. So I launched that July of 2019, sharing stories, sharing my story, interviewing others. It led us to getting a lot of men reaching out for help. And that
Mm,
was where Rebuilt Recovery was founded about 8 months into the podcast. So January 28th of 2020 was the day that we took on our first couple of clients. And now it's been 4.5 years of really deep in the trenches. So studying
mm,
behavioral change, studying addiction, studying neuroscience, taking the things that we're learning and applying it to the men that we work with. We built programs, we've done one-on-one coaching, written free trainings, free ebooks, really built a global movement of high performing men that want more out of life and realize the pathway to doing that in their lives is removal of porn, but more importantly, becoming the men that they need to be to live without
yeah,
it for the rest of their life. So
yeah,
that's in kind of a quick, nutshell, like my story, my journey. That's kind of led me here today.
Yeah. Um, there's so much, so many follow-up questions I have about that. First, I really want to ask, how did the consumption of pornography affect your relationships, both when you were really into it a lot personally, and then what about in the workplace? When a lot of people are watching it in the workplace on their breaks, and then they go back, how does that affect your relationship with your coworkers? So that's kind of
mm,
a double question, but talk to me a little bit about your interpersonal relationships and then at the workplace.
Yeah, I think the biggest relationship that it impacts and affects is going to be the relationship with yourself. And then the relationship that you hold with yourself is going to dictate how you show up to other people. It was very early in my 20s that I was in a relationship where I got caught. At the time, I didn't think I got caught doing anything wrong. I definitely subscribed to the belief that it was just something that was normal for guys to consume. But the person I was dating didn't see it that way. She was more from a traditional Christian upbringing where I didn't have a foundation of faith in my life at the time. And she kind of presented as like, if you continue to do this, like, we're not going to continue to be a relationship. So very early on, I figured out how to hide things.
mm,
So when you talk about like, how does it affect a relationship? Like if you are looking intentionally to hide things from the person
mm,
that you're trying to share life with, that's going to manifest in a lot of other
yeah,
areas. I do believe in the saying, how you do one thing is how you do everything.
do
So if I'm not
everything.
willing
Yep.
to truly take this mask off in this area of my life, can I ever fully give you who I am emotionally? This
Yeah.
word authenticity, this word vulnerability gets thrown around a lot in kind of today's social media culture. I wasn't authentic. I wasn't vulnerable. There were parts of me that I wasn't willing to
Mm,
share. Now you take that over the course of 5 years, it's going to be lies on top of lies on top of lies on top of lies, where I got
yeah.
to the end of that relationship and we didn't even know who each other were. It's like all
Yeah.
that she was getting was a representation of the person that I was willing to share with her. So
Wow.
it
Yeah.
obviously impacted our connection, our emotional connection, our physical connection because there was only a portion of the individual that I was able to share with them. Now, when you take that into the workplace, let's say, you know, for an example, like when I shared, like I would go into kind of these restrooms and kind of relieve myself. Obviously, at the time, I didn't realize like that there was a lot of stress and pressure that I was not being able to process. So I would go have a break, relieve myself, and then once again, I'm carrying all this guilt. I'm carrying all this shame that I'm not really clear about. So once again, the staff, the employees, the coworkers, the people that I was working with were only getting a small fragment of who I was. Now you take a brain that is consuming pornography from a male's perspective, and he's objectifying women daily on the things that he's consuming. What you train yourself to do is what you're going to begin to look for in reality. So how was I viewing coworkers? How was I treating coworkers? You know, I can't give any clear examples. Like I believe I was always a person that at least carried a level of respect and wouldn't try to cross lines, at least in the things that I said or did. But that didn't mean that my mind wasn't going in a lot of very unhealthy places. So, you know, it causes a man's brain to constantly seek objectification, to constantly seek some type of arousal from women. So whether it's a girl at another cubicle or somebody that's working in another location, like your brain is just always looking for more and more and more. So that would be how I would probably say it. It showed up the most, but like I said, the biggest relationship was the one that I had with myself, and the negative impact that it had on that.
Right. Like, so like at the gym, so like in gym settings, so men that are watching pornography, are they gonna, you know, my fears, are they gonna look at women as sexual objects versus as like athletes, or just think of them differently because they're constantly looking at bodies in a sexual type of way, right? So would you say that it just like changes their thinking in all those ways?
It has to, right?
Really
You know,
affecting how women feel about ourselves too, whether that's correct or not, but it's the way like I feel as a woman when there's men that I know are watching pornography, right? So do you see my point?
yeah, yeah. And that's, I mean, it's kind of a loaded question, and it's a really big and important one as well. But I think it's twofold. And one thing I try to help at least the men that we work with understand is what I just said. What you train your brain to look for is what you're going to go and look for out in the real world. And this is backed by science. There's literally a part of our brain called the reticular activating system, RAS, reticular activating system. It sits in our prefrontal cortex. Its job is to shut off the things in reality that aren't important and reveal to us the things that are important. The people that speak of like the secret or kind of manifesting things, this is the scientific truth behind this. So if every morning, like one of the first things I do is I pull up a website and I go look for women to objectify, I'm training my brain that objectifying sexual women is an important thing in my world. It doesn't matter if I go to the gym, to the grocery store, to a coffee shop, or just walk around a park. My brain is going to look for sexual women to objectify. Now you reverse that by stopping the consuming, but then telling your brain what are things to be important. Now I think the caveat here is that there are women that go into these places and are seeking that attention. And this is where I try to help men, and this is who we work with, help them understand that those women that you've been chasing for a long time, the women that you are constantly seeking out there, when you stop looking at women as sexual objects, the women that present themselves as sexual objects are no longer attractive to you. It kind of works twofold. Like for me now, when I see a woman that is clearly dressed for attention, she is clearly presenting herself in a way to try to get men to look at her. It's no longer like I want to objectify or even like look at her in a sexual way. It's almost I feel hurt for her. And this is where the heart begins to change. It's now I see like kind of a broken girl. It's like, okay, like there's something that she's missing. She either has a poor relationship with the men in her life, maybe she's hurt. But I think for men, the encouragement is when you get away from this thing, what used to have this grip on you will no longer be the case. But yeah, like I said, what you do, what you train your brain to look for is what you're going to go look for out in the real world.
Yes,
I love
that is so good. And that we could just go on a tangent about the brain, you know, the two mentalities. If you wake up every day and you're like, ugh, what else could go wrong? You know, and then things will just keep going wrong. Or if
More
you're
things are
like,
going to go wrong. Yeah.
my gosh, my everything is going my way. You'll just have a more positive attitude and things will go your way regardless of how things are going. So on that note,
Mhm.
I want to ask you the next question. We talk a lot about statistics, as do you, and we have read that statistically, the earlier that someone's exposed to porn, like in your case, 5, 6 years old, the more likely they are to struggle with it in early adulthood. And we also need to make the notation that this is the technology generation. So things are not even remotely the same as when any of us were growing up. So, kids nowadays, let's say we're trying to project what things are going to look like in 15, 20 years. Statistically, if they've seen it younger, is it true that they're more likely to struggle with it in early adulthood? Can you shed some light on that and what you've observed with maybe some specific examples about the men that you've worked with and or teens that you've worked with? We'd love to hear what are they really dealing with now?
Yeah, I think it was at one of our events or one of your events. I pulled up some screenshots of applications. We field dozens of applications every single week with men that are seeking help, and are looking to either join one of our courses or get a little deeper into some one-on-one coaching. So there's a filtration process, and one of the questions, and this is were some of the screenshots I shared with you guys, is like, what is the root of your struggle, or what is it that you're currently struggling with? So I'm not even asking a question around like the age of first exposure. I can tell
Yeah.
you 80% of the applications that come in, that question is answered with, I got introduced to it somewhere between the ages of 11 and 16 years old on average, right?
Wow.
So we know now that the data points to average age of first exposure is 8 to 11. I'm beginning to think more and more about this. I don't think it's just the age. I think it's the age paired with scenarios around the
Mm,
use and consumption. If a young boy early on in his life is dealing with an unhealthy home environment. Maybe
mm,
there's some toxicity in the relationship between his parents. Maybe there's an absentee father. Maybe there's a little bit of verbal and emotional abuse, whatever it is. But this kid doesn't have real tools to process his emotions, and he doesn't feel like he can go to his parents and talk about these things. If he sees pornography and he begins to find comfort in the escape, or maybe it's the same thing with video games. He finds comfort in the escape from the reality, right? So home is
mm,
toxic. It creates a stressful environment for him, but he can lose himself in video games or pornography. What this young boy is doing is he's training himself. When my nervous system is elevated, when I'm in a
mm,
stressful state, how I get myself out of that is going to consume pornography. There's a lot of great ways that a young person can process and handle those emotions. Number one would be having a parent that understands emotional regulation and creates a safe place to have real conversation.
mm.
There's a great book that Dr. Caroline Leaf wrote, Helping Your Children's Clean Up Their Mental Mess. Had her on the
Oh,
podcast, and it's just understanding the
A lot of
language
adults need
around
to read that too.
she wrote the adult version book first, and then she followed it up with a kids version. But it's understanding that they're like how the language that we use around our emotions is so crucial for children. Now, why this is important, if this boy is 12, 13 years old, and this begins to become his pattern of behavior of processing these emotions or dealing with these circumstances, he's got 11 more years until his brain is fully developed. So the
yeah.
the age of full brain development for a young man is somewhere between the ages of 23 and 25 years old. And the part of the brain that is developed later on in life is the part that is associated with emotional regulation and rational thinking. It's your prefrontal
Mm,
cortex. So the brain in of itself, the physical structure is there, but all the wiring, all the neural connectivity is taking place through those teenage and early adult years. So by the time he reaches a full adult male, he spent 10 years training himself that when I feel this way, this is the pathway for it. And that's what creates the addictive pattern.
Yeah.
mm,
This is
mhm,
important for people to understand, is like most times with pornography addiction, especially in today's culture, it's not a sexual behavior by nature. It's not a sexual
mm,
addiction. It's an addiction that is tied to emotional regulation, the ability to
mm,
deregulate our nervous system and it's been ingrained with years or decades of patternistic behavior of when I feel this way, if I watch these things, do this thing, it calms my nervous system. So if we could wrap our heads around that and see the behavior through that lens, I think that helps a lot of women as well, because it's always tied to like emotion, sexual nature. And for the vast majority of the men that at least I've worked with and have had success with, very rarely is it tied to their social or their sexual behavior. It's always this emotional regulation.
That's
Wow.
interesting. So then does it also go on to say maybe they can give up porn, but then because they've trained their brain to look for a way to, relax and dysregulate, like you say, then are they more likely to go towards drugs or alcohol or some other addictions? Is it common to sort of trade one for the other?
And
Would you say that?
yeah, if you're not approaching recovery in the
Right.
right way, and you're trying to find something to replace it with, but what we'll often see is very rarely is there just the one behavior that's associated to it. Some guys it's food, some guys it's video games. Vast majority of them it's escapism in social media. Social media kind of creates this drip effect where you're getting small hits of dopamine, and then before you know it, you're completely drained, and then you just need to go see pornography. But a lot of times the behaviors are kind of wrapped up in a handful of them. Like we've had a lot of guys that will start with stressful work environments. These are high performing men that we work with: doctors, lawyers, CEOs, executives. So at the end of a long day for them, it's 1-2 vodka to kind of bring down some stress. Then they find themselves, scrolling Netflix, scrolling social media. Then before they know it, they're 2-3 drinks deep. They're 30 minutes, an hour deep in mindless scrolling. Then before they know it, like they need something more,
Yeah.
and they find themselves in pornography. So there's usually the other behaviors that are kind of tied into it. Very rarely do you have a guy that's like crushing it everywhere, has all the regulation tools. And he's like, yeah, I just can't stop watching porn. Well, we'll see those every once in a while, but a lot of times it's food, shopping, gambling, drinking, drugs are kind of paired up in it.
Interesting.
Oh, interesting.
Wow.
Okay, I really want to ask you a little bit more about recovery too, but there's one more burning question that I have about kind of like a myth and things that I hear people talk about porn when I go and survey people sitting at the pub or wherever. So people say, it's just a little bit. I only watch a little bit. How can that harm anybody? I only watch it in between relationships. It's not harming my relationships because I'm only consuming it when I'm not dating someone. All these things kind of still startle me, and all these, just concern me in all these ways that they're justifying it. And I'm wondering, is it still hurting their brains or their relationships or hurting themselves? Like, what do you have to say about these little myths? Like just a little bit won't hurt anybody. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, the science and research is pretty clear that super high levels of dopamine without effort is harmful and damaging to your brain. Now, to an individual that believes that, I mean, there's got to be follow-up questions. Well,
Yeah.
if you're in between relationships, why did the last one not work out? Let's unpack that a little bit. And I'm sure I could probably point to something around your inability to handle and process your emotions that probably lead to you not being successful in that relationship. Like there's a reason why the relationship that you were in didn't work anymore. That's why you're single. So instead of just saying during this period of being alone, I'm going to go watch these videos, it's like, well, no, unpack yourself, take a little bit of personal responsibility. And this is where most people want to look outward and won't look at a mirror and say, what am I doing to cause the issues within my relationship? It all comes down to personal responsibility. The question of, is it good or bad? That's a horrible question. I don't care. Like, is it good or bad? I'm not here to tell anybody what to do with their life. The evidence is clear. The research points to how it changes your ability to handle, process emotions, how it changes the way you see people, how it distorts and disrupts your motivation, how it hijacks real connection and intimacy. Now, if those things in your life are bad, then the answer to that is bad. If somebody is presented with all that and says, I don't care, I'm not chasing becoming a better version, go do you, man. Like that's not for me to tell anybody what to do with their life. Our
Right.
message,
Well,
our mission, our work is dedicated to the guys that want more
Right.
out of life, that realize that even a small blip of pornography is damaging to their heart, to their mind, to their soul, to the person that they're trying to become. And I think more and
Mm.
more research will come out. And that's why I love conversations like this. I love
Yeah.
being able to talk about these things openly. I think we'll get more. Here's the thing, Chris and Sarah, is the internet in the capacity that we have it is what, 2 decades old, maybe at most. It's like, how long does it take for science to catch up? We always know it's
Right.
30, 40 years behind it. I've shared some other clips in some advertising pieces and talks that I've given for you guys, where if you go back 150 years, like the doctors were prescribing cocaine.
Right.
Any rational person would be like, no, a doctor doesn't give cocaine to cough patients anymore. 40, 50, in the 1940s and 50s, there was advertisements for Camel cigarettes as a number one cigarette that a doctor prescribes for pregnant women. Any rational, logical person in 2024 would say, yeah, you know what? It's not good for women to smoke cigarettes when they're pregnant with
Right.
children. I think we'll get there. Unfortunately, a lot of people are going to stay stuck. But man, anybody that's hearing and watching this, like if your goal in life is to become the absolute best version of yourself and you're truly chasing greatness, pornography has zero role in that equation for you.
Mm. That's a
and
great
then of course,
differentiator.
yeah, really. And then of course, we always at Stop the Movement make the connection between pornography and human trafficking, because it's the third most common form of human trafficking. And when you're watching that, you have no way of knowing if the woman is consenting. There's, even if you're not choosing to watch a video that it's of a child getting, raped by their nephew or whatever, it's still on that platform that you're supporting. So you're still supporting that industry indirectly, even if you're choosing to watch these more clean type of videos as well. So I like to think of it that way as well too. When people tell you like, oh, it's not hurting my mind, but
Yeah.
but you're also supporting raping of children as well.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
and that's
People don't know that. They don't understand.
it's a good point, and it needs to constantly be reminded to people, and it needs to constantly be addressed and talked about. What I found is a lot of times that becomes more meaningful to guys once they're kind of on the other side of it. Like
Yeah.
if they're so caught up in it, if they're justifying it, if they're saying, you know what, watching porn is better than me cheating my wife, like that guy's got some other issues that need to kind of be addressed and unpacked.
Yeah.
His wake up call is not going to be, oh, I need to stop watching porn because there's a potential of me seeing trafficked individuals. Like that comes later on. And I think it's a very important conversation. But to the guy that it'd be like the same person, right? That is like stuck in a drug addiction. If you would tell him, the amount of people that, had to die in order for this drug to make
Right.
its way to the States, they could care less. Like all they want is their fix. So the person that's seeking the fix, like some of that stuff is important, but really that conversation begins to resonate with them once they kind of get on the other side, once their brain begins to kind of reset, once their heart begins to kind of change form, then those things become more important.
Mm.
And that becomes a driver for a guy to continue to stay clean, to maybe become
Mm.
a voice for others. But in the mix, like when you're caught up in it, like you need to begin to understand, like this is holding you back from becoming the best version of you.
Okay.
That's great.
Okay, great. So kind of moving forward a little bit, practicalities. So say that I find that my partner has been watching porn or is addicted to porn. How can I help them? Where do I step in? What should I say? What do you advise for that?
Yeah. Well, you're not going to help anybody that doesn't want help first, and
Right.
this is a difficult question to answer because I think there's so many driving factors that play a role in the dynamics of that relationship. If the relationship is built on strong values, morals, and principles, that should be an easy conversation to have for those people. But most of us know that most relationships aren't built on any substantial foundation. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, she's hot. Oh, he's cute. we like each other, we have fun. Now we're going to end up moving in together and play pretend marriage. Anyways, different tangent to go down there. But if the relationship is built on a strong foundation of that, like you should be having regular conversations about the issues within the relationship. At least that's how I would see a healthy relationship
Right.
being. But if you don't have that, going to your spouse, going to your husband, going to your boyfriend and saying, you need to fix this right now or I'm out the door. If you've never laid any groundwork for that, it's probably going to make that person just turn away and run the other direction. So I think having intentional conversations about how it makes you feel, and I guess we're talking to women now, right? Because you found out the person is consuming or addicted. So how does this make you feel? Express that to them. Realize though that there's a high probability that they're probably not going to care. And that's just the honesty, at least right now. I think as the years continue to progress, as these conversations begin to have, I think more and more people will understand. But all three of us sitting here know that there are so many men out there that justify it because I'm not cheating on her, nobody's getting hurt, all the lies and excuses, right?
Yeah.
Bringing resources and information to the table. And I hate saying this, but our highest probability of success is men that come to us and the relationship's on the line. Like in the past 3 months, we've had half a dozen men that have enrolled in our program that literally were in a separated state from their wife. They were either sleeping at their buddy's house, they were sleeping with their parents, they had rented a Airbnb to get out of the house. Men, when they're at the pit of like hell or they're at a rock bottom moment and it's either change or something will change, those guys will do what's necessary. If you've justified it, you've known about it for a long time, but now you hear a podcast like this and you're saying, oh, well, now I'm changing, but you've been okay with it for a very long time. That's going to be an uncomfortable thing, or that's going to be a challenging kind of conversation to have. But I think bringing it in a way where you can express how it makes you feel, not guilting them, not shaming them, but also understanding that he's probably had it ingrained in his life for a very long time. So just like breaking any addiction, there's going to be work. There might be some slips, but yeah, real tough question to answer because like I said, there's so many factors that drive the dynamics of that relationship.
Well, then it really sounds like, as you said earlier on in the podcast too, how important it is for them to be able to be wrapped around other men that are struggling, as you said, helped you with your recovery. So, maybe help them get in with other men to process what they're doing versus doing it with their wife.
Yeah, no, of course.
With their wife. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's and I highly encourage men not to have their wives as their accountability partners. Like you need to be going through this with other men. If a couple's trying to work through this together and the husband's like, okay, babe, well, you're going to be my accountability. You're going to check on my apps. You're going to have logins to all my computers and devices. You've now basically just made your wife your mom, and she's going to need to look at you as another child within the home.
As a child.
Yeah, and that's just going to create a whole. You guys can speak to the dynamics of male, female, masculine, feminine within a relationship. But if a woman sees her husband as like a third child and not the leader of their home, like she's going to have zero respect for them. So there's never. I don't ever see a healthy way for the woman to be the accountability. Now, if you're in a men's program, if you're in a men's group, if you're working through something that has like steps and has support, she can know what's going on. Like she can be included in the communication and conversation. Like the recovery doesn't need to be a secret from her. It should not be her job though, to check in on you and make sure that you're making progress.
And I could say that she should like really look for opportunities to allow you to become the leader and to lead her and to become the man that you maybe have been failing to, but she needs to really look for opportunities to do that. That would be the right way to support.
Yeah. And there's probably opportunities for her to maybe explore some of her own healing and growth. Not saying that she's the reason as to why, but clearly, if it's a 20-year or 10-year relationship, both of you have made some mistakes that have led you guys to this point. It's not just it's
Yeah.
all his fault. It's well, no, because you've been around for 10 years as well. So what growth, what healing, what work needs to take place within you? What does that look like? Therapy. I have a
Right.
great friend, Jolene Wynn, the porn addict's wife. Like her job is literally being a life coach to women that husbands are struggling with porn. Whether or not the husband's doing anything about it, she's built a very successful business helping the women heal. You know, I come from a lens of growth mindset. I think every single person in the world has an ability to become better in all facets of their life. And I see recovery through a growth lens. So if a guy is working on becoming a better version of himself and the wife is just staying stagnant, in time, that relationship is now going to have a new dynamic
Right.
as well. So wives, women, look for opportunities while your husband is growing, healing, transforming, to see what areas you need to kind of grow, heal, transform in
Sure.
as well. We all have
Sure.
shortcomings in our lives that can be worked on.
Sure. That's great.
Excellent.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. So as far as hope, where do we move forward? You know, what do we do from here? Sarah, do you have any other questions, or
I
we
do.
want
I've
to
got
talk
one.
with some practical? Go ahead.
Yes, I'm curious. Obviously, we're focusing this talk today on the romantic relationship, on having a partner. However, a lot of the people that we serve and we come across, you know, we speak to schools, to churches, to businesses, are parents. We'd love to have a 1 hour conversation just about what this looks like from a parenting perspective and a kid's perspective. But I am curious if we can touch on it vaguely as a parent. And gosh, if we had time to give you a dozen stories of people that have come to us and said, I don't know what to do. I'm a parent. I found out that my 15-year-old, you know, has been exposed to it. In what it is exposure, it's everything that's on TikTok, on Instagram. Very hard to get away from it. So my kid has seen it. They've been intrigued. Now they're regularly consuming it. Obviously, there's a lot of shame and guilt around it. Um, how do I handle that conversation? One, and then now that's the reactionary piece. So let's talk about that. How do you handle that conversation? But I also like to back up a couple steps. How do we have these conversations preventatively? Because our kids are going to be on social media, they've got access to the internet. How do we, from your perspective, have a preventative conversation? Because inevitably, this is something they're going to come across. What do we do if and when that happens?
Yeah, and I'm glad you kind of added that caveat there at the end, because I do think that there are two different conversations that need to be had. The hope and goal here is for everybody to have the preventative one first, right?
Yes.
I mentioned it at the beginning. Chris McKenna, pornography should be the most common word in every single person's home. Your kids should know what it is, they should know what it isn't, and they should know who they go to when they see it. Because knowing that the average age of first exposure is 8 to 11 years old, by the time they're in high school, 90% of males and females have seen pornography at least once. So the probability of anybody listening, watching this right now that has children or will have children, they will see it. Like, you're probably not going to win the lottery and have the one kid that, makes it all the way through school, doesn't see it. If you do, blessing to you, God touched you down and said, like, touched down on you and said, you have this one incredible child. But most children are going to see it. So how do you get in front of that? Is you have the conversation. Like, you just make it an accepted thing. Like remove the taboo, right? Hey, at the age that is appropriate for you and your children. I'm not here to tell anybody what age that is. There's great resources we've talked about previously at events. Good Pictures, Bad Pictures is a great book for younger children, how to begin to have conversations around sexuality, around body parts. Don't come up with goofy names for your privates. Like, just call them what they are. Begin to have real life conversation with your children as young as you possibly can. And then when they're ready, say, hey, with technology, I'm giving you this phone. You may see something. There may be a kid at school. There may be a family that doesn't have the same values and principles that we do. Their kids do things that this family is not okay in doing. When you see that, I want you to come and tell me. You will not be in trouble, and we'll have a conversation about what the next steps are going to be. So getting in front of it, preventing it is always going to be the first measure, right?
Mm,
To the parents,
excellent.
though, that didn't do that, and now they're playing reaction, don't guilt them. Don't shame them, right? Like they didn't know any better. You messed up because you didn't get in front of it. So take the responsibility on
Mm,
yourself. It's not the kid's fault that he saw something that was created to get his brain addicted to it
sure.
and now is
Sure.
addicted to it. Like it's not his fault. Like, so don't make him feel like it is his fault. If it's as simple as taking the technology away from the children, that's a great place to start. Like the research shows that the later in life that you give a kid a smartphone, the better his mental health
Yeah.
is. When I see 11-year-old like in restaurants with smartphones or with tablets or walking, around the neighborhood, phone like head locked into their phone, I feel for that because the
Yeah.
kid doesn't know, and the parents probably don't know the harm and damage that is causing to the young kid's brain. So I would tell the parents, like, you can take your technology away from your phones. Like, I grew up in the 80s and 90s. Like, we didn't have phones, and I did okay.
Yeah.
Get them out in the world. Like, so that'd be a couple things is don't make them feel like it's their fault. Don't make them feel guilty and ashamed for the things that they're doing. Like they fell into something that was created
Right.
to literally addict their brain, and it's not an accident
Worked.
that now they're addicted. But do you need to get them in counseling? Do you need to get them in therapy? Do you need to get them around some type of mentorship? That's all going to be kind of dependent upon how severe the scenario is. Um, but a lot of it could probably just be handled through intelligent, intentional conversations, and then putting boundaries in place.
Mm, excellent. Those are fantastic tactics. Great. Thank you for that. All right, Kristen, go ahead to your point.
Just kind of wrapping things up today, because we really like to take like dark, gloomy subjects and then present it as hope, present and give people some encouragement. So we know, we've seen you through your recovery and through the thousands of men that you've helped now, recovery and healing in your relationships, and that you can recognize how porn is harming us and our culture. So what are three good like 2 or 3 action steps that we can take today to maybe stop the demand, or just what can we do moving forward? How would you like to wrap this up?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Kristen. And I do think my story, my journey, and our message, as intense as it may come across, and as personal responsibility focus it is, like I do try to come from this place of like there is hope. You guys didn't know Frank prior to 2020. I think that's probably when we originally met. The 2018 version of Frank was in the pit of hell. Like
Mm,
there were multiple periods throughout that year where
But
like I
you
didn't.
appeared so successful on the outside too. Like you were building a business with the bodybuilding, like you were like the ultimate, like men would think that you were like the ultimate like guy,
Mhm.
making lots of money and things like that. But then secretly you were suffering. So anyway, sorry
Yeah,
for interrupting.
no, and
Right.
that was the wake up call,
That's
right?
what's so secret.
Because I had kind of presented and put these masks on of everybody that had it all figured out. And there were some areas in
mm,
my life that I did, like I definitely accomplished a handful of things, but looking myself in the mirror and realizing like all of it meant nothing to me. Like I could have like multiple times, Chris, and I thought about how I would end my life. I'm so glad I never took
wow.
took that seriously.
But
But it was dark, and it was very, very dark. And here I stand, 6 years later, and am I successful to the degree that I was before? In many areas, like I've far beyond that. There's other things that I don't think I are as important to me anymore,
Mm,
but I built an incredible life that is service oriented, that puts other people's first, that allows me to use gifts and skills that God gave to me and ultimately help other people. But my story is just a story of one. We've had hundreds and thousands of men that have gone through our course and programs that have all turned it around. We've had relationships restored. We've had relationships
mm,
formed. I've been able to see marriages started. I've been able to see babies created and birthed
Mm,
by families that have taken the responsibility. I've seen businesses launched. I've seen partnerships formed. Like it's been truly incredible.
mm,
And I believe we're just getting started with what we're going to do. To the guy out there that is struggling though and is looking for what are the next steps, I think it starts with getting honest with yourself. Like, how bad has this been on you? How has it held you back? I always say that's the first thing is like, if you can get clear on how this addiction is holding you back from truly
mm,
living your greatest life. We all have dreams and hopes and things that we want to accomplish. How is having this a part of your life holding you back? Get clear on that. Secondly, I would say find a person that you can entrust in, whether it's a mentor, a coach, a therapist, a pastor, an older brother, an uncle, a father, a man in your life that you look up to and maybe has
mm.
things that you want, and can provide a safe place where you can have an open and real conversation. So
That's
get
great.
real and honest with yourself, find some support and accountability, or somebody to do this walk and journey with, and know that it's going to be a long road, and failure and this journey is only dictated by you giving up. If you're
Mm,
making some success and you slide back, there's an opportunity to learn there. We have to see it through that lens. Don't try to just white knuckle your way through it. Look at the
right.
areas that you need to grow, skill sets you need to develop, mindsets that you need to shift,
Yeah.
relationships that you need to create. How do you begin to see people through a different lens? But trust the process, stick with it. If it's something that's been a part of your life for 10 years, you're probably not going to overcome it in 10 days or even 10
Right.
weeks. Know that there's going to be a journey that you're going to have to overcome. There's going to be some difficult conversations you need to have with yourself. So get radically honest with yourself, find some support and accountability in your life, and be willing to put in the hard, difficult work, and
Mm.
be willing to, what we say, the parts of you that need to die, allow those parts of the old self to die, because on the other side of that is the creation of the man that you can and God wants you to become.
That's right. Sometimes you need to close
Amazing.
some doors in order to open new doors,
Hmm.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. That's
Absolutely.
amazing. Extremely encouraging. And we so appreciate your input to just show there's hope. This is not the end by far. There's a whole life that you can live that you just have not experienced yet. So as we wrap up, we'd love to open it up to any questions that any of the attendees have. Um, we'll give that just a minute, and then if not, then we'll wrap things up.
They can be typed in the chat or the chat or Q&A. Yeah. It's kind of hard to do sometimes. Okay.
We also recognize that it may, if this is the first time that you're hearing of this conversation spoken in such an open way, may be uncomfortable to put a question out into the open. And so we want to let you know that there are ways that you can contact us as well, in a more private setting. Again, because this may be new for some of us. So to reach us, you can email info@stopthemovement.org. You can find us on social media at Stop the Movement, or go to our website, stopthemovement.org. Frank, if you'll let everybody know where they can find you as well, so that people can reach out in that way.
Yeah. To email me directly is frank@rebuildsrecovery.com. And the best place to connect with me outside of email would be probably on Instagram, Coach Frank Rich. Feel free to, drop a direct message to me. I still answer and field all of those myself, and will do my best to get back to you in a timely manner. So Frank at Rebuilt Recovery or Coach Frank Rich on Instagram.
Perfect. Okay. Well, we are extremely appreciative of your time, your insight. I mean, you're really one of a handful of people doing this across the nation, and it has been so eye-opening for us as an organization, for the thousands of people that we have been able to train together. You are really doing incredible work that is saving lives. And so we just want to say thank you. And we appreciate your time and for really shedding some light and some hope on this issue. And we very much look forward to having a conversation next time, focused specifically on parents and internet safety and what to do, how to navigate being a teen in this day and age. But know that if you are in a relationship and you're struggling, there's hope, absolutely a way out, and you're not alone. So we appreciate your time. Thank you for spending this lunch hour with us, and we will send a follow-up email, and we hope to hear from you guys soon. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks, Frank.